Hello, welcome to Ghosts in the Valley podcast. I'm your host, Al Cooley. Please go to Apple Podcast and rate and review Ghosts in the Valley. Berkshires UFO. What an awesome episode of the new Unsolved Mysteries that was recently released this past July on Netflix. It was the most watched miniseries this year. And that's phenomenal. I mean, there's a lot of unsolved mystery fans out there that were really waiting for this. And being on Netflix, I think really helped this show even more so because they don't have to go through the restrictions of, say, ABC or NBC. They're more free, I think more freestyle to do what they want to do, which they still kept it very professional. And I'm so excited that when I reached out to the cast and crew of the Berkshire episode, I was just honored that almost all of them got back to me. I'm still working on others, so hopefully they get back to me real soon. I planned on doing a 2 or 3 part series on this, but it's been so popular with my responses. I'm going to do at least a 6-part series. What we have to look forward to coming up today is Thom with also a special guest, Judge Kevin Titus. But before we get into Thom, I want to give a shout out to everybody that contacted me. I reached out to a lot of people on Facebook groups, Twitter, Instagram. I got tons of responses from people that seen this UFO on September 1st, 1969. They seen it. They called it in. And it just was not in Sheffield, Great Barrington. It was all over. It was in New York, Connecticut, Maine. So I believe there were more than one UFO. I do believe their stories. It didn't happen just in one place, one person. There's a lot of people that did not come forward, that still haven't come forward. But I believe with the stories from Thom, Tom Warner, Melanie, Jane, I think that it will bring forth a lot of people now, because it's more, I think, acceptable to people since Pentagon and the government has released the new declassified sightings from the Air Force, from the Navy, that they kept secret for all these years. A little bit about Thom. I credit him for actually getting this ball rolling. You know, I look back on his documents, and the documents will be on my Ghost in the Valley pages in Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. So there are photos of his documents, of his lie detector tests that he took, that he passed with overwhelming flying colors, 99.1% accurate. He doesn't have a reason to lie. He isn't benefiting off this podcast because I'm not paying him. Netflix didn't pay him. Unsolved Mysteries didn't pay him. So yeah, if he does write a book, or if any of them get a little bit of money off of this, why not? I really appreciate their time, their courage, their honesty, coming forward and sharing their stories, not only on my podcast, but other podcasts on Netflix. So without further ado, here's Thom. I want to thank you for being on the show today, Thom.
Oh, not at all. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I mean that sincerely.
Before we get into the 1969 event, let's talk a little bit about before the UFO Growing up, did you ever have any experience with UFOs?
Prior to 1969?
Prior to 1969, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was actually supposed to be covered in the first segment layout, if you will, or the way the Unsolved was to be filmed. They were going to focus on 1966, 1967, where I used to sit on top of our family stable and look out, and I felt very detached from the other kids back in the day, and how certain children would come into our diner, and you could see in their eyes and feel that we weren't the only ones who had experienced something prior to that, and Melanie is one of those people. And so when I first saw how they were going to film this, it was really about our farm more than anything, and our diner. We went out and actually bought a jukebox to replicate the jukebox that was in our diner, and we had put a lot of time into laying out a scene where certain children who had this experience got together and started to maybe a little bit recluse, with respect to how they were with throwing the ball around, which no longer seemed to interest us. We seemed to have gotten more cliquey and stayed with ourselves. The kids that had the experiences, and how the kids were drawing what they had seen, and taping them to the bottom of the chalkboard on the lip where the chalk would go in school, and the fights on the bus, and that kind of thing, how it started to divide the community. Because 69 wasn't what really divided the community. In some respects, it brought it back together. Because it was 67, really, those years between 67 and 69, when our family, being New Yorkers, being from outside, we were out, let's say we were outsiders to begin with. So, talking about this sighting that I had, and my brother and my mother and grandmother prior to 69, we became kind of a target in a lot of ways. And there were a lot of fights that broke out in our diner, which is how, again, that friction, that turbulence, that push and shove situations, that seemed to come on a regular basis in our diner by those who had difference of opinion. And that is where how our diner later on was looked at as altering the natural progression of the community. But my brother and I, we remember vividly an incident in 1967, and it did involve my mother. 69 was very different for us, because when we came over that bridge, my grandmother had seen the lights, or a light, bleed of light, through the planks of the bridge. She didn't really mention that till later, but she did notice that there was an odd, the light going through the bridge was bright, but the lights coming through the planks of the boards were brighter. And you could see it. And it wasn't like coming from our car, it was coming through the bottom of the bridge. And when we got through to the other side, I was giving my brother a candy. I've said this all my life. And that's what caused my grandmother to turn around and look behind us through the back window of the station wagon to see this sphere. And the sphere that arose from the bank of that left side of the bridge. And I tried to describe it in a lot of different ways, but I found a new way to word this. It was like an illuminated cue ball from a pool table. I used to say a bubble, because it was so defined on the edges. And but it wasn't translucent like that. It was solid. It rose, and these two, or maybe more, I just remember a couple of rods of light that shot into the waterway, into the Housatonic River. And then I don't know if it dissolved, or it was a long time ago, but then they were gone. Those rods had either gone back into it or just dissolved. And that sphere rose up and went along the other side of the tree line. And then my brother, look, we were all trying to find it again, because we really didn't know where it went, because there was a tree line in between the road and where the sphere went. And my brother was looking to the right, the left, we're all looking around, and we saw a second one, which was over water as well. It looked orange, and it seemed to have a moving center to it, whether it looked like lava or a wave or something. And my brother had the better look at that, because as we were growing, that would come and go in vision, because there was a lot of obstacles in the way of that. And that's when everything felt funky to us. We felt like we were underwater. I say underwater. My mother uses like close, like the atmosphere was close to us. But I grew up, for the most part, I lived in Florida for a long time. And so while you're in the eye of a hurricane, you don't hear anything. There's no sound. The wildlife is affected by what's coming or what has been or still getting acclimated to this change. And that was what it was like going down this dirt road. It was almost like we were submerged in the low part of a swimming pool, yet these sounds, I'll never forget the sounds that hit the back of our, I say hit the back of our car because it sounded like stones hitting underneath the fender wall. It was like, and it echoed, it was loud, but everything else was like muted. And I was behind my mother, who was driving. My grandmother was in a passenger seat. My brother was to the right. And it was dark, so you couldn't see in the car. The headlights were on. We're coming to a stop. We all felt like this. We all just kind of felt like we were becoming placid. And my mother, the windows were open. It was very hot that night. My mother had actually stopped the car at this point. The headlights were on. The car was running. And we were looking out over the field, where Marcus and I filmed. And even going back today, I used to think as a child, maybe what I remember was, small, so maybe everything seemed larger, right? I went back there with Marcus and the crew, very professional crew, by the way, best crew I've ever worked with. And we looked over the field, and you can still see to this day. I mean, it was a good 100 yards between those trees where it hovered. I mean, it was huge. And even though the bottom of it put out a little bit of a light, it wasn't that light that made it possible to see the craft. It was like the shell or the skin of it illuminated. Yeah. Off to the right side of it, it was orangey, goldish, had patches in it, like a pewter, but it was almost like someone had taken a blowtorch and heated up some metal and how it cools at different temperatures. The right side was very much like that. The left side was darker for some reason. I obviously don't know why. It just hovered about 3 stories high. It looked like a turtle shell because I do remember lines in it or patterns to it. But what was interesting, too, is that the center of it didn't come to like a point or anything like you see on, whatever online. The middle of it was as fat as the top and bottom. I mean, it was wide. It was like if you took the top and bottom of the craft and put it together, that's how fat the middle would be. So the middle was twice the size of the top and bottom. And when I say the middle of it, I mean it was like almost a flat, like a snake skin that went around the middle of it. It wasn't all that impressive, in today's standards, right? Or what you say, it was very plain. I didn't see any windows. I mean, I wasn't looking for windows back then. I wasn't looking for landing gear because when you see something like this and you're standing there, you're in awe, right? You are just like, it's not like if I saw it today. I think if I saw something like that today, I'd be thinking of all the things that it meant, what could be possibly happening, right? Is this the end of times, right? I mean, but when you're a child, you're not looking at that. You're just amazed by what you're seeing. And so I was just staring at this thing. And what's my mother says, well, they weren't hurt, when she was on, she did the behavior panel with me. She was saying, well, it wasn't like we were really hurt because to her, she's more thinking about what this means, or what is going to happen next. And she was more worried about that. Whereas for me, I was just amazed by what I was seeing. And to put this into perspective too, and again, it wasn't really making any noise. My brother says he kind of remembered a rhythmic, woo, 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 like that. That's something he mentions. And then, we all, like I said, we all just felt a little out of it. And then, the car just lit up. I mean, it wasn't like a dome light. I mean, it was like a blast of light into our car. And at that point, I could see the dashboard. I could see the back of my mother's head. I could see my grandmother. You could see everything. I mean, it was just like someone had put, bunch of fluorescent tubes in your car, right? I mean, it's just like you couldn't even see out the window. I mean, the whole thing was just, and it didn't last long. It was just like, and then all of a sudden it stopped, and then all of a sudden, what seemed like, here's the other thing too. We're like in this funk, so I don't know how long we were like that. I don't know if that was minutes. I don't know if it was seconds. But after this happened, it was just like, we heard life come back. We heard the crickets, the cadians. So I've mentioned that before. There were frogs, all the things that shh. You heard that shh, that sound you get. And then bang, we weren't in the car anymore. So it went from being like underwater to light that fired into our car, I guess. and then nothing, and then shh, and out. It was like almost in stages like that. And at least it seemed like that to me. And I remember being in, it reminded me of an airplane hangar. I'm not saying it was, that's kind of what it reminded me of. There were fluorescent tubes, or what looked like fluorescent lights or tubes in the corners of the walls that met the ceiling. I remember a glassed in wall that bowed inward. I was grabbed by my left arm. It hurt. And this area that I was in was much bigger than the craft itself, So I don't know where I was. And that's one of the reasons I also don't use certain verbiage or terminology, because I don't know how we were taken or removed from the vehicle. And I don't know how we got back. And something else that's very interesting to me is that when we did come to in the vehicle, my grandmother was in the driver's seat. Now, my mother was in the passenger seat. I was where I was when this whole thing started, and my brother's head was on my right knee. He was out. The car was off. The headlights were off. My grandmother came to first in the driver's seat, and she instinctively tried to wake up my mother. Nobody was responding. We were just, whatever happened, we were out. So she, who didn't usually drive much, she had a driver's license, but she didn't drive very much. She took the car down the road here. It was Old Covered Bridge Lane, I guess. Turned it around and went back into town for help, because we lived like maybe 5 to 7 miles away. Town was only like a mile away, so she went to town for help. And when she started going to town, she actually was so out of it, she missed the entrance, actually, turned around and came back into town. And when she got out of the front door, I believe it was the slamming of the door that woke me. Or it was just a coincidence that I came to about the time that she got out of the vehicle. And nobody was responding to me. She was walking into Silks. The only person that was awake was my grandmother, so I opened the door and called to her. And, and she didn't wait for me. I just kind of got out and went to her, Nana, and when we got into Silks, she finally got to the person behind the counter. She walked right by him, and she went to the back of the store and got tangled up between bikes and strollers and stuff like that. And I was trying to grab her hand, and, I was scared. But my grandmother was, even though she was awake and driving, she was kind of either out of it or got there and didn't know what to ask for help for. But there were no paramedics. No paramedics showed up. The police didn't show up. My grandmother talked to the clerk for a minute or two on the way out and realized that it was almost 11 o'clock, I guess, and we had left the diner around 8:30. And so I was gone, or we were all gone out of the car from 8:30 to almost 11 o'clock, which is the same time that Melanie was out of her car. And Melanie was in a car of 4 people. We were in a car of 4 people. She was at a lake. We were at the river. She was in a car of 4 people. I was in a car of 4 people. We had a lot in common with regard to that night. But we got back in the car and we drove home, and it wasn't until the next morning when everybody was in our diner having breakfast that the calls started to come over the radio, And September is about the time school starts, so it wasn't really loaded with kids because it really didn't, start yet. But a lot of the people were hearing the broadcast. What was this? What did they see? What's going on? And which kind of helped our family in a lot of ways, because until 1969, no one else had really seen anything or admitted seeing anything. And so because this was witnessed by so many people, it actually kind of helped our family more than it hurt it. It was 67, the years between 67 and 69 that made it difficult for us.
Yeah, it's like 51 years ago, and it's like yesterday, comes back to you. Do you feel that maybe sometimes you wonder why maybe your family was targeted?
Yeah, I do. We've had a lot of discussion about that. This is speculation, but there is a lot of talk about our families. O negative. I'm O negative. My brother's A negative. The Rh negative gene. There's 9 of us. O negative blood was the only blood tracked by the U.S. government back in the 60s because it was the universal donor, during the time of Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
We had Pratt & Whitney, Sikorsky Aircraft, General Electric, the Groton Naval Base, Electric Boat, we were surrounded by government manufacturing facilities, and Sheffield is pretty high. It's about 2,000 feet above sea level, and our farm in this area was pretty high up. So there's a combination between, I believe government or a form of the government was involved in this, because what I believe removed us from the vehicle was human. Where we were, we were sitting here with three objects, right? Three off-world objects. There's no question of what, was off-world. And we were in this middle of this triangle of three pieces. And we were affected by something. And there has been reports of government coming out of the woods, seeing vehicles in the area. The magnesium for the atom bomb was mined just 3 miles from my monument or a restaurant. And so what were we really caught up in? I don't know. But it's been going on for a long time. Even in 2013 and 2014, there are reports of crop circles in the area. Which is online. You can Google it. BLT research, Sheffield crop circles. It's all over the place. They still see these spheres today. Over the area. Gina Paul and Marissa Paul used to walk to school with us. They were having a barbecue that night because it was Labor Day. It was a holiday. That's why so many people saw it, because it was a holiday weekend. And a lot of people were getting together and having these barbecues that may not have normally socialized with each other, but because it was a mixed group of people of all ages and they all saw it, is why it had, over 200 and something witnesses. And so it was never a matter of did something happen. It was simply a matter of what was it. And that's how I think we were very lucky or fortunate to have had so many witnesses to this thing. And with the radio station and the credentials of some of those witnesses, and the loss of my father on the same day this went to the United Nations, collectively, it made history. What was it? I don't know if those spheres were any more than anybody else, but they weren't ours. Yeah, I think that it was more the struggles and the hurdles that we had afterwards with the neighbors and friends, for a long time, which hurt my mother. My mother was 29 years old, and she owned 80 acres of property. We had a huge house, raised horses. We had the restaurant. My mother later became a radio personality for KZE FM. My grandmother was the governess for Franklin Delano Roosevelt's grandchildren. My father ended up getting in politics and became a selectman and an attorney. So we're an accomplished family that didn't really want to, attain our careers by any means, because back in the day it was a different time. But you'll hear in Unsolved Mysteries and others that we didn't want to talk about it. That's not true. We talked about it all the time. Jan Green may not have wanted to, and some other people may not have wanted to, but our restaurant was where the talk took place. Now, did I go out to baseball games and talk about it? No, friends, sure. We used to walk the railroad tracks and put pennies on the railroad tracks and flatten them out, and one-on-one with your friends, you talk about it when you're away from things. But in the restaurant, it was like you get your hair done. That's the way my grandmother used to kind of describe it. When you get your hair done, your hairdresser knows more about you than anyone else. But that's kind of how a restaurant was when that door shut and you were having a coffee shake after school, or you're having some fried. My mother made really good French fries. She used to deep fry French fries in bacon fat, and they were awesome. So we were known for our French fries, believe it or not, and shakes. And here's the other thing, this will give you an idea. Our diner was the only area in town back in the day where you could listen to music. WSBS radio was an AM news station. That's why they reported it to WSBS, more so than the police department. Not to mention, it didn't really happen in Great Barrington. It happened in the town next to it, Sheffield. But, you could come in our diner and listen to the Stones or Creedence or whatever you wanted for a dime or a quarter, whatever it was. Get something to eat and munch out, a little bit. And it was very alive with that jukebox. So that is another reason that so many people came there and listened. And then, to my mother, what she had to say, or our family, and would talk about it. So our diner was really the hub for conversation. So to hear, we never talked about it. Of course we did. We've talked about it our whole lives. Back in the 80s during the Hudson River Valley sightings, my father was approached by a friend of his who was also an attorney in Manchester, Connecticut, who lived not far from my condo, Robert Bletchman. And Robert Bletchman at the time was the public relations director for MUFON. We didn't know what MUFON was any more than anyone else at the time. He was very interested in the connection between the Hudson River Valley sightings over the water and the Great Barrington or Sheffield R incident over the Housatonic River. And then there was a little bit of interest in Cash and Landerman in Texas, how the environment was affected around her vehicle and how was there a connection or anything similar with respect to Cash and Landerman. And so in 1992, when Robert had finally put something together with Mohammed Rabidin, who was the president of the Parapsychology Society, of course, out of respect for my father, he asked him if it was okay if he mentioned our case, because, if my father had aspirations to go further in politics, he didn't want to, who knows who would have picked it up. He didn't want to hurt my father's opportunities. And so my father said, sure, as long as you don't go too far with it, And Stanton Friedman was there, too, which is one of the reasons when we got inducted into the Historical Society, and we're getting now added to the museum in Roswell, which Stanton Friedman was instrumental in making that museum what it is today. He was very happy about that we made history, because he was also at the United Nations Symposium where our case was discussed in 1992. And so that's why the telescope is being donated to our park. And, of course, I think it was 14 years later when my father wanted to finally write about it, discuss, bring with the papers that he had seen or gotten back from the UN address, which I still have, which is going in a book. Finally, I'm writing a book. He lost his life on the same day. And that's kind of how the Historical Society had said, okay, this is there's too much here. We need to look into this. And they did. They called WSBS Radio. They talked to him about what happened and the fact that they might still be the tapes, even though they said there may not be tapes. Tom Jay's wife is still alive to this day, who was the disc jockey for the radio station. And there is a possibility that some of the copies of the tapes might be in Arizona, where his children live today. There was boxes of tapes sent there, so apparently there is a chance that they do exist, because from what I understand, when this was going to the UN, those tapes were actually replayed. So there are people that remember hearing the broadcasts replayed in early 90s or late 80s.
It'd be nice to get some of these calls, that came in that didn't make the Netflix Unsolved Mysteries series. You talked about your book you're writing. When you think that'll be out?
I'm about, 80 to 100 pages in. I think, I wanted to have it done by October, but it's not going to happen. It probably won't be finished till next summer. There's so much to write about. We're going to start with the ending because it's current, and it just keeps going, right? I mean, it keeps growing. I mean, even to this day, we're seeing that heartfelt from people we don't even know. They just seem to feel compelled to go to the park and donate something. And I'm not somebody who looks at what happened and feels traumatized by it. I'm more traumatized by the behavior of people these days than I am what really happened. I feel it was a privilege to see what I did. It was a privilege to be part of that. Did it blow my mind, and did it, steer my career and as a photographer and a fashion photographer, and to get into follow the career that I did with cameras and that kind of thing? Sure. Is that a bad thing? No, I love who I am. I think I've done well for myself. We adjusted. We weren't, destroyed by it. Did we have to move and make new friends and leave a community that my mother loved because she just loved the Norman Rockwell feel, and that was to be the life she wanted for her family and the horses? Yeah, that destroyed any opportunity to have that kind of a life. But at the end of the day, together we made history, that kind of thing, and now it's time to write the book about it, to preserve what really happened. And I need to do it, but my God, it's just like every time you turn around, it's like there's more things. We've got more and more statements from people that are witnesses that are notarized. More and more witnesses are coming out of the woodwork. We're learning more and more about, the magnesium spill and things like that. So, we think we have all these chapters laid out, and, so we're still writing the ones that we can, but I would say midsummer, I think we'll finally be finished with this thing. I do think the monument's going to come back. If you don't mind, I'd like to talk about Unsolved for a minute.
Sure.
So Unsolved Mysteries, I first started talking with Cindy Boyle. Yeah, I first started talking with Cindy back in 2016, I believe it was. At first, we were going to really focus on her family. But my brother bailed. My brother didn't want to do it. And I think he's just kind of tired of the whole thing. He's tired of the silliness and the circus that follows it, and feels that we've pretty much done enough. And so when he didn't want to participate, my mother decided I'll step in for Matthew. It was the first time she had ever opted to ever go on camera. And the reason she did was we were promised that our family's credentials and our documents would be shown in the episode. That was promised to me for 4 straight years. It was also promised to my mother if she stepped in on behalf of my brother. So I took all the documents, and we were at the bridge, and they had computers running out there, the whole bit, battery operated, whatever. And we made copies, gave all the copies to Unsolved on location. And unfortunately, none of it was shown. And to me, that really wasn't fair to us, because we didn't need to do another show. We only did it because we were promised that for once, my mother's late husband's credentials and everything that he did in support of this incident to, lose his life on the same day that our case was mentioned at the United Nations was, finally going, that his efforts were, and my mother strongly believes it was connected to this case, as a lot of us do. My mother, the building that my father worked in was closed down. There were new ceiling tiles put in his office. His computer was wiped out. It was mentioned in the New York Times. So for my mother to get pull the strength together, she just had a heart attack, but she just had heart surgery. To opt to do this and to talk about something that in her mind destroyed her family and the loss of her husband, finally do this for him and have his credentials shown meant a lot to her. And for Unsolved to not keep their word, for lack of a better way to describe it, and they didn't, really bothered my mother a lot. And so I'm hoping that in this reboot or in October when they have the follow-up, that they'll do that. Because when we watched it with my mother on the love seat here and ended without showing any documents, she was beside herself. And my brother called up and said, "See, I told you, that's why I said I wasn't going to do it." Now, I like Unsolved Mysteries, and I like the crew a lot. And I realize that probably some of the editing came on behalf of Netflix, not so much Unsolved. I think it brought a lot of attention. It showed the flight pattern. It showed a lot of other people that were witnesses to it that night, and how significant it was. And they did a good job with it. But I just think it could have been so much more powerful. So I'm hoping that it's not over. I'm hoping that they'll do the right thing and introduce some of these documents and the credentials like they said they would. At the end of the day, it was a good show. I mean, they did a good job with it. Jan Green was terrific. Marcus did a great job. I like Marcus. We got along great. The crew was fantastic. If you see some of the posts and the blogs are like, well, how come there's no documentation? How come there's no this? How come the police department in Great Barrington didn't have any records? Well, for instance, it didn't happen in Great Barrington, first of all. And the calls that came into the radio station. And the police department in Great Barrington, they had a ringed binder from way back when. Any page could have been taken out of that. This was a holiday weekend with people drinking. This was a holiday weekend where things happened. And they only had 2 incidences in that report, one with beer cans or something. It would have been very easy to take the page out. Or maybe there was another report on there that they didn't want to mention or show. But that's almost impossible when you had 200 and something callers. And you had even Sheffield, even Eddie Galata on the show talks about how he got in a police car with his father, who was the chief of police, and drove out looking for this thing. So you've got a police department that went looking for this thing on that night with his son, yet the bigger town next door doesn't even have a report in the book. None of that made sense to me.
We will be right back with more of Thom Reed and Judge Kevin Titus after these messages. Are you shopping to find your thing? Is your thing stickers, t-shirts, posters? Is your thing wall art, clothing, home and living, phone cases? Are you shopping for your kids and babies? How about stationery? Many other gifts. You can find all these at Redbubble, redbubble.com. Get the app and save 20% at redbubble.com. Find your thing. Click on the link in the show notes. That's Redbubble, redbubble.com.
So how are you, Al Cooley?
I thought what I'd do would just go into the legal end, like the monument.
Well, where would you like to start? Like, what kind of question? I can tell you how I got involved in the paper, what the significance of me signing it is. It's my papers are now officially in the UFO Museum out in Roswell, New Mexico, forever. So, and there's pictures of me signing the documents. I've been a big supporter. I'm also one of the custodians of the UFO park myself with Thom and lots of other people. I have presented historical markers on the plot. I've even came up with doing a kiosk so we could, what I call the UFO park, I call it the Gettysburg of UFO historical sites. The reason I say that is because truly, when I certified it and sealed it, it became part of the first in U.S. history to everybody of my caliber ever doing anything like that. And historical, people like everybody now wants to know why I did it, how come I did it, how did you know the involvement, did you just do it for? No, I did it because that actually was seen by a lot of us when we were kids around here that very same weekend. And so that's another reason I got involved. And the legal precedences are people that they violated the park's privacy, if you wish to call it, and now it's being accepted. There were a lot of people, the town of Sheffield, that constantly was trying to cause problems to the park. I'm not into it for the, I support the town because I knew the family for ages, but also because of being a historical significance. It's something that over 250 people saw and heard it within a 12-mile radius from the Sheffield area all the way down to where I live in Canaan, Connecticut. And, when you have 250 more people and calling into the police departments, calling into the WSBS radio, who, by the way, I do a show on there. WSBS has recorded it. It's actually an amazing situation. You can't make something like that up. And there's just too many people that claimed, and their descriptions are not like somebody told them. Everybody has almost an exact opinion. They didn't even know anybody. You know what I'm saying?
Right. When I was doing my investigations, I got a lot of people responding back that witnessed the UFO, that weren't on the Netflix series, Unsolved Mysteries. And I heard you were supposed to be on there and they left that part out.
They left the entire thing off.
I was confused on the monument, the one that was taken down. It was erected and taken down, so I tried to contact.
It was taken down twice.
Right. And I was trying to contact the board members on that. Nobody responded back to me.
Oh, they won't, because they know, they actually positioned it. Thom did not. They moved it twice. Thom said, okay, move it then where it's proper. They did that. Thom had did not direct it. It was done by them. It was a disgrace to be I'm being very polite here. They haven't had the right of way for many generations or decades, 20 or more years. And the bridge itself is the only thing that actually belongs in Sheffield. Once you cross the other side, that's UFO Park. Private property was given to the UFO Park Corporation, which is what Thom Reed's ahead of. I'm one of the caretakers, and there's many other people, and there's so many famous people that have donated benches and things. Travis Walton. Big names, and we've always maintained that park in a great way, historical significance, and that's how I'm so involved. The park to me is, I'll say it again, is the Gettysburg of UFO history to me. It hasn't changed in 51 years. The road looks the same. The giant corn on the left side, the giant stalks, you'll never see anywhere else in the country other than some unusual place. The grounds over there are very weird. The magnetic, there's a certain type of radiations there. I've had specialists go in there and do a test on it. We've had pictures of the corn. The corns are the size of like almost your arm. My wife held them, and I couldn't wait to eat the corn. I love corn. And the next day it went black, and yeah, you want to eat that, So, but basically, but my thing is like signing the documents. It's, it's a big significance. I mean, it's I'm the first person, I'm going to say it, that has ever done that besides the governor of Massachusetts. And I think that's part of the story. It's not about me. It's about the action that was taken. And it's about the Thom Reed family. I'll tell you what, I have complete credibility. I'm a renowned historian. I'm now a radio personality. I'm also a judge. I'm very involved in this kind of thing. I've even told a few people at the Sheffield meetings a couple of times, they were trying to cut off the people talking about the park and the marker and getting things back. And they were being ridiculous. And they told one of the guys, no, you can't talk here. You don't have that right. So I stood up and said, excuse me in the meeting. I said, who are you? I said, I'm Judge Titus, District 30. You know my name. And they just looked at me and I go, they have every right. Once you gave them the permission to talk about this, that's it. It was their turn. Now, you give them that right or you need to shut this meeting down now. They got the chance to talk. Thom can tell you more detail. People try to bring up the documents as why are there two documents? Well, it's not, there was no error. It was not a mistake. And so when we got all the documents, not did I sign one, but I signed all of them because they're in WSBS. I certified those and sealed those. And I love that one. It's one of my faves because they can definitely tell you what happened. The radio station got called.
One of the things, since you're on the subject of the documents, I want to clarify something because I did speak earlier, but to clarify, the governor's citation that was issued in October was never on the monument. It was never affixed to the monument, correct?
Right.
It was always the November document, which was the reissued document. So when there was this talk, Kevin, right, about the citation being written in error, the plaque that was in the park, the plaque that was affixed to the monument, was the amended citation, not the one when the papers would say. And however, this narrative started to get around town that governor's citation was written in error. Like you said, it had an error in it, and because it was missing the date of occurrence.
Right. It was just the date they forgot to put in it. That's it.
So to run around and say that the citation was written in error and it was being rescinded and all that, first of all, you can't rescind it because it's been certified by a judge, even if they wanted to. Right. Not to mention there were two that were issued, not one. And you don't make a mistake and then reissue another one and correct it with a date. So for that narrative to be going through town, which also some reporters said had lost, the governor's citation had lost some of its punch, if you will, because it was written in error, was unfair. And so then you signed the second one, you sealed that one. And that one, if I'm not mistaken, you even sealed the packet that it came in, the mailing packet.
Yes, I did.
Show that. Right. And so that's, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but even if the lieutenant governor or the governor was running for re-election and said, maybe I shouldn't have done that, he can't do anything about it anyway because it's sealed by a circuit court judge.
Plus, if you want to be funny about it, you could say, well, if you want to rescind it, then I guess you guys committed perjury. And that wouldn't look good for a governor or vice, a vice governor, right? Would it, lieutenant governor?
So while we're on the subject of the park and the monument, I think it's fair to say that I've never sold a book. I've never tried to capitalize on this, never made any money. TV shows don't pay anything. We volunteer our time.
I know that one.
Yeah, you took time off from court just to do it.
Yeah, nothing.
It's never been about making money. It's for me, and I don't know how many people know this, but when my father was in office, he was a selectman. He was an attorney. He had his doctorate in law. He was also an historian. And so there was a respect with my father and Kevin. And after my father left office, Kevin was very supportive because he was also a witness to what took place in 1969 and kind of stepped in where maybe my father, was no longer able to do that. He was no longer to have that voice. And so Kevin's like family now. He's kind of stepped in and taken the role of my father in a lot of ways. Someone who has a lot of background and knows the laws and knows what how we can make this into a really nice park, which is really for everybody else. It's not for me. It's not for Kevin. We don't benefit from it. As a matter of fact, it cost me a lot of money to maintain the park.
I was just curious that, when they took down the monument, if it was, in my thinking, being from near Cleveland, Ohio, I don't know nothing about the area, but if it's on private property and it's erected, I mean, I'm just thinking to myself, common sense, it had to be a political thing with somebody who didn't want it there.
It's not that it's not wanted. It's a rebranding effort. And I've said that from the beginning. Now, if you're a selectman or a mayor, and you have something that takes place in your backyard in a town, and somebody starts to get the idea to, local people want to support something, so it's private property, so you start to build this little spot on your private property, and then 5 years later it becomes an international tourist attraction, and you might have a rite of passage through that property and an easement where you could park an ice cream truck. So would you or would you not entertain a way to do that, certainly when the person who owns the park or leases the land lives 1,000 miles away? Shows come into the area. Let's be honest about this. It's our family's incident. So we're the ones who kind of say, okay, I'd like this person's instrumental. This person, did this or that. So we kind of have we can guide the show a little bit and say, these are the people that are the ones that have supported the park. Whereas if somebody else gets control of it, they can insert their own surrogates. And that's something that I think we need to watch for, because the park is also a memorial park. There are 3 people who lost their lives over this topic, and over, not directly affected or due to the topic, but who were advocates. My father lost his life on the same day that this incident was mentioned at the United Nations in support of 33426, and why it has the display that it does in the Roswell UFO Museum. It says right on the plaque, in support of 33426. My father died on October 2nd, the same day.
Right.
Which is why my brother and I decided to use some of our contacts in the film industry to get some attention, and how we got in Good Morning Canada and that sort of thing. That's what refueled this. And then out of respect for my father, and you can see this with ABC News, Heather Covier covered it back in 2015, that the monument was really a tribute to my late father and why his name was on it. And then, so then that plaque, if you notice, that was a proclamation. And that was actually taken off because it was damaged with spray paint. Yeah. So then the police said, well, maybe we can affix the governor's citation to it and put a seal on it to prevent people from damaging the monument again. And that's how my father's name was taken off the market to begin with. So originally that monument was kind of a tribute to my late father, and why I dedicated that entire unveiling that was live with ABC News' Heather Covier out in Albany, New York, to my late father. So it's very personal to me. And then, of course, Karen Hankey, whose late husband was a friend of mine, and she supports the park, and she owns Gingras Lawn and Garden. She lost her husband. She donated a bench in his honor. She could have put that bench anywhere.
Right.
And then, of course, you've got Stanton Friedman, who helped us get our incident into the Roswell Museum, and actually has a picture of him on my website holding the induction letter from the state of Massachusetts. And so to me, this park means a lot more than selling hot dogs.
As you were saying, Thom, the most fascinating thing that's being donated is a telescope.
Yes.
Telescope is people can look to the heavens, space, and it's going to really let them, feel what it was like over there.
So that's kind of what the park stands for. But I didn't install anything, pay for it, nothing. It was the first time I saw it. It was already in Sheffield and it was already erected. But when it was moved the second time, because being that I was already the benefactor of the monument, I had to have a deputy on my behalf to be there to make sure that it was left in good shape, it wasn't broken, that kind of thing. And he was to take pictures of this and then forward that information to my attorney. And once, over the years that this was starting to become more of a tourist attraction, and I think certain people had ideas for the park that where maybe it was best if, we rebranded the name, or maybe we, moved the monument out of there. Some people actually didn't even like the way it looked, but it was going to be fixed up, and so people were going to brick it, I think. But whatever the reason was, I'm not going to speculate, but I kind of know what it is. But now the new select board members don't really know who put it there because there was some backpedaling. And because of the backpedaling, no one really knew the truth. And it wasn't until months after the monument was already taken. It's just, here's something that happened in this town. A lot of people have gone out on a limb here, right? You've got the governor, the lieutenant governor, a judge, historians, a radio station, an office, a chief of police's son, Eddie Galata, who spoke, who was on the show. A lot of people have, gone the extra mile for this because they know someone who saw it, or they were in our diner back in the day when this happened. When you throw a dark cloud over it, it's not fair. And to look at how what was said to me back in the day when this first got inducted, it was like, it was our restaurant that really divided the community is how we got inducted. But like it was said to me by Debbie Oberman that, look at Billy the Kid. Billy the Kid altered the railroad. Therefore, his event or his mark on history was historically significant, and it was true. So because our diner had altered the natural progression of the community, it was historically true. And then there was the conversation about Jack the Ripper. To this day, we really don't know who Jack the Ripper is. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't a Jack the Ripper. So when I was speaking with historians, they're like, Jack the Ripper is no secret. We may not know where he came from. We may not know, why he did what he did. We don't know where the UFO came from, and we don't know why it did what it did. But in both instances, we know what happened, how this whole thing got inducted. There were a lot of attempts to find out how to induct this. And at the end of the day, it was the fact that this event and our family's diner, and the loss of my father on the same day this went to the United Nations, and the support from WSBS Radio, and all those kids that used to eat in our diner before school and ride our little bikes to school. I mean, Melanie used to come in our diner too with her boyfriend and get takeout. All these people are part of something historic. They're part of something. This is the first case in United States history to be deemed historically true in America. You don't taint that with nonsense. I need to pay forward the same amount of respect that was given to me. And I want to do that. And I think that's where Kevin comes in. Kevin's a big part of that. This case has to be looked at for what it is. This is not folklore. This is not a myth. People donate willow trees and plants. They go there for no other reason than to donate plants. I can't begin to tell you how much has been donated since Unsolved Mysteries came out. Unsolved Mysteries actually donated a bench. Travel Channel made a donation. Ancient Aliens paid for the entrance sign.
That was a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was fantastic.
What Tom's saying, with the park, and then the monument getting taken down. And
well, I mean, if you want me to talk at what legal precedence is, there are lots of those. Tom and I have talked about that over the last couple of years. What is legal? I mean, to me, if this had been in, let's say, my court or even over in my state over here, I would say that the town of Sheffield would have been in complete contempt of court, and they probably would have been ordered to remand and turn over the missing benches in the monument. But we believe that they broke the monument. That's what we believe. Because they always wanted Thom to sign something to say, well, we'll give this back, but you got to sign this and take it as is. And like, whoa, wait a minute. We're not going to sign anything unless we see what, the item is. And that also told me that they broke the law and they know it. And as far as I'm concerned, when you look at the facts, they're the ones, again, as I said earlier, who actually placed the monument there the first time closer to the bridge, and the second time they moved it. Of course, Thom would say, well, yeah, if that's where you think you wanted to put, okay, fine. But he didn't do it. That was all over with. People thought, okay, now legally we've got the park. But you see, later on we figured out that the property is owned by a friend of Thom's. And, he gave the land to the UFO Monument Park, okay, because, A, it looks the same as it did 51 years ago on September 1st of 1969. The road's the same. The telephone pole where Thom stopped. All these things are still there. The monument, we have another one with a plaque explaining the story. And as I said to Thom, what I'm hoping to do before I'm off this world is that we'll have some kind of a kiosk with a kind of a sketch. You ever been to like the Gettysburg battlefields and they got these nice prints of what happened in this section on the field, and like a sketch drawing or color of it, or this, and they tell the story. That's what I want to do. And we thought it would be nice to have this little like pamphlet that people can take and can walk the park. They can go up to the cornfield, they can go up the road, and they can feel what Thom and his family feel. And I'll tell you what, from people I talk to, they feel it as they walk down there. I even have a sister-in-law that is one of those people that can't really prove that anything's real. But when she got there, she felt very uncomfortable. She felt like something had happened here. And I said, well, there you go.
Well, you're talking about the monument, the taking of the monument, but actually it gets deeper than that, because we have that blatant malice, because they willingly and knowingly did something again. They actually moved it themselves and then tried to blame me for it.
They basically committed perjury. They lied. They told a total phony story, like fake news. And it got so crazy that we were in the point they were trying to say, well, we have the right of obstacle. Well, number one, they don't have the right of way. They've abandoned it 20 years ago. Second, they don't maintain it, like snow or something. They don't remove snow. They don't do any maintenance. The roads have big ruts in them. They don't fix that. They don't maintain the lawn. They even put up these barriers at the other end of the bridge, which is basically almost on the UFO Park side, which technically speaking is, what are you doing on our property? We've even posted signs that I paid for myself saying private property.
Per the direction of the chief of police.
Yep.
Police department with me.
That's right. He said I would post a picture and post a sign saying, do no trespassing, private property. I did that. And then within 2 days, they were gone. Somebody had ripped them off from the property, our property, or the park's property. And at that point, that's now a violation. You've stolen private property again.
This is what happens when you have people lying about how things got there and who put things there. Because when you run that in the paper and you get some little, maybe a hot-headed little kid or teen or whatever, and he's like, oh, that wasn't, they think that was put there under false pretense. So then that stirs people's feelings that might be on the cusp about this topic anyway. Our sponsors are like, well, if you lied about putting the monument there, then how do we know, right? It adds that, like in court, like you've said, Kevin, if something's bad, it's all bad. So that's been kind of this issue for me too, to clarify, because I've been speaking the truth since day one,
Mm-hmm.
So when you try to make it look like I don't want to use the word lied, but when you've concocted something or put the monument there and said, no, I didn't do it, and this kind of thing, it kind of shoots or weakens what everybody else has come forward to support you with.
You even have pictures of where they moved the marker. Remember, they painted the ground. You didn't put those there. You see, we know where all this is coming from and why it was going on. But I was very outspoken. I mean, many times I'd said what I did with the meetings, and I gave Thom some good legal advice, I think, and I think he told some of it to his attorney, who kind of knew I was right. So the point is, when you give up the right of way, that automatically means that you're out of it. But the main thing is it's private property. It's owned by a friend of Thom's, a big farmer, who gave it to Thom, and then he donated it to the UFO Park. That's it. They have no right to say anything.
At least, yeah. But yeah.
I mean, there's got to be several felonies, Al, in this whole thing, really.
I want to thank you, Judge, for
You're welcome.
Sharing your thoughts and enlightening us on a lot of stuff I didn't know.
I'll talk to you again soon. Nice talking to you, Al, and thanks for having me on.
Thank you, Thom. I'm going to put your links in the show notes. They'll be in the bottom for everybody to go to donate to the park and to go to your links, whatever, for them to find out more about your story, your side of it.
Thank you, sir.
I want to thank Thom Reed and Judge Kevin Titus for being on the show today, kicking off my 6-part series of Berkshires UFO. Please tune in next Tuesday with my conversation with Tom Warner in the Netflix series on Unsolved Mysteries, the Berkshires UFO. Tom was abducted, and he will share his stories with you as well. Until then, I'm your host, Al Cooley, Ghosts in the Valley.
Podcast Network.